The 1963 427 Galaxie is arguably the best muscle car to come out of the Ford Total Performance era. It dominated NASCAR, and the lightweight versions cleaned up in NHRA stock classes, along with being prepared and entered in road racing events in Europe like the Tour de France race in 1964. Truly a very versatile race car. What we are going to look at in this video are the unique features of these cars, which sets them apart from the regular production cars. The differences in the body, the chassis, and the engine will all be highlighted. The bodies shared between the 427 cars and the standard models are basically the same. There is no special bracing or hidden VIN numbers unique to the 427 cars. The only difference is the obvious being the engine code stamped into the VIN. There are 3 to 6 locations where the VIN numbers could be stamped, most well known being the 3 stampings on the cowl tags. The first one is located under the hood on the passenger side near the hood hinge. The other 2 are located on the right and left side of the cowl underneath the front fenders. These 2 can only be seen by taking the fenders off or by using special optical equipment. 2 other VIN locations are on the right and left side of the rear seat support, about an inch below the package tray on hard top models. One more that has been found on some convertibles is on the ledge just underneath the front edge of the rear seat. Not all cars carry these VIN numbers in these 3 other locations. In fact, the majority of cars did not have them. Some people claim that all 427 cars had the VIN numbers in these locations, but this is just not the case. As of now, there's no known reason why certain assembly plants stamped the rear seat areas on some cars and others didn't, but one thing's for sure, it was not a 427 specific thing. At this point, I want to clear up some confusion that surrounds the 1963 lightweight models. It was common belief for years that these cars were issued what was called an MX number, which consisted of the letter M and a sideways X, then a 3-digit number in front of it. This was said to be unique to the lightweights, and that the 3-digit number was the car's production number. This is not true. The MX number is merely body shop procedure information that was stamped into the cowl panel. M was for Corinthian white paint. The sideways X told the body shop to cut the hole for the floor shifted transmission, and the 3-digit number was the body shop rotation number to keep track of the car. It's not known at this time as to whether or not the 3-digit body shop rotation number matched the assembly plant rotation number found on the build sheet. From what I can tell, these types of stampings happened on all Norfolk assembly plant cars. I have several different examples from different cars like these to support that conclusion. Since almost all 1963 lightweights were built at Norfolk, and rarely would you get enough examples together to do any sort of comparison, it's easy to understand the confusion. The chassis of the 427 cars did have many differences which separated them from the standard ones. The frames on the 427 cars were the standard big block assemblies with one notable exception. The factory lightweights carried a special frame tag located under the radiator support crossmember. This tag had a part number on it, stamped C3AA-5005-AA MOD. Popular belief is that the 1963 Galaxie lightweights used lighter 6-cylinder frames to save weight. That's just not the case. The lightweight frames were built using hand-selected frame pieces that were the thinnest possible without going below the allowed tolerance range to ensure the frames could be as light as possible while still retaining proper strength. Ford discontinued the stamping of the VIN number on the frame starting with the 1963 model year. The differences start at the front of the chassis with the suspension. All the 427 cars carried the same suspension components as the standard cars, including upper and lower control arms, steering arms, offset shaft units, and steering boxes. The one item that was different were the steering stops that bolted to a mounting bracket on the back side of the lower control arms. These steering stops contacted the spindle and prohibited the wider 15-inch Galaxie Hayes wheels and tires from hitting the frame when the steering was turned full right or left. All 427 cars came equipped with manual steering with no exceptions. Some cars have been seen with power steering units installed, but that's not correct. It was probably the result of a dealer filling in an owner's request after purchase or an installation at the time of a restoration. All manual steering cars came with the 17-inch steering wheel, which aided in low-speed turning. The 427 cars did have special coil spring rates, which varied from body style to body style. There were two different stabilizer bars used in 1963. The first one being the .66 diameter bar, and the second one, the .94 diameter bar. On the 427 cars, it's common to see the smaller .66 diameter bar. However, it's common belief that both sway bars came on 427 cars, and that either would be correct on a restored or original car. The front brakes were 11 by 3-inch wide units that were shared with station wagons, police package cars, and the taxi cabs. In the Ford Master Parts catalog, there's a listing for aluminum front drum kit for taxi cabs, which is part number C3AE-1102-E. There's no evidence that this part was ever used on any 427 car from the factory, but the possibility exists that some were installed by racers for the obvious weight savings. All the 427 cars came equipped with the 15 by 5.5 Galaxie Hayes steel wheels. These wheels were special to the hypo cars and had fully welded centers with 4 small slash cuts in them. Tire sizes were the standard 670 by 15 black wall, with the white wall tire being optional. The optional tire size, which was standard on convertibles, was the 710 by 15 black wall, with again a white wall tire being optional. Because of the 15-inch wheels, special wheel covers and hubcaps were again unique to the 427 cars. Full wheel covers came on the Galaxie 500 XL models, and they were the spinner style. There were 2 different versions of this spinner style wheel cover. Part number C3AZ-1130-F, which came on the early 63 427 cars, and was what Ford called bright finish chrome flash. This is a rare wheel cover and not a lot of cars had them. The second more common wheel cover, part number C3AZ-1130-Z, is found on later 63 and all 64 model year cars. These were made of highly polished stainless steel. The hubcap used on the Ford 300 through Galaxie 500 models was the C3AZ-1130-A and measured 10 5/8 inch diameter and is often called the dog dish style cap. One note should be made about the Galaxie 500 XL spinner wheel covers. They can only be used on the 15 by 5.5 inch Galaxie Hayes wheels. This wheel has a 1/2 inch more front spacing, which allows the wheel cover to be properly seated on the rim. If the standard Ford 15 by 5 rim is used, the wheel covers will fit, but over time the front set will loosen up and fly off while driving. The wheel covers do have a depression in the center, but that's not enough to clear the grease cap on the 5 by 5 wide wheels. All 427 equipped Galaxies as well as most of the earlier 390 high performance and all the 406 cars had the passenger side brake line moved from under the engine to in front of it. Excessive heat from the large tubular cast iron header manifolds overheating the brake fluid is thought to be the reason for this change. The fuel system on 427 cars consisted of 3/8-inch fuel line running from the back to the front. The hose running from the fuel line to the fuel pump consisted of a length of hose with a fitting compressed onto one end. The fitting end would screw into the fuel pump, and the hose would be cut to just over 8 inches of length and clamped to the fuel line from the tank. The fuel tank sending unit still retained the 5/16-inch pickup tube and outlet. Moving backward to the rear suspension, you'll find that the 427 cars carried a unique rear housing with internal parts, with special leaf springs. The rears all contained large differential bearings and the large axle bearings, along with the heavy-duty 4-pinion conventional or non-locking differential with half-inch ring gear bolts. According to the Ford Master Part Catalog, the early rears were not noted as carrying 31 spline axles. They all had 28 spline axles. This rear should have also contained the C2AE big bearing twin rib case, which resembled the later nodular iron ones, but were said not to have any nodular iron in them. Sometime from mid-April to early May of 1963, Ford did order a change from the weaker 28 spline axles to the stronger 31 spline axles. It's not known exactly how long this change took to be in full effect, but by 1964, all 427 full-size Fords were said to have 31 splined axles. The leaf springs used on all the 427 cars from the factory were the 6-leaf, unequal length springs on both sides. The 427 engine came in two versions: the 410 horsepower 4V Q code and the 425 horsepower 8V R code. The engines were virtually identical except for the induction package. The engine block is part number C3AE-6015-AB with a 4.23 cylinder bore. The crankshaft was made from cast iron, part number C3AE-6303-B, and had oiling grooves on all main journals. The connecting rods, part number C3AE-6200C, contained heavier duty rod bolts than the standard production rods. The pistons, part number C3AE-6110-AA, contained two eyebrows and two bumpers. The eyebrows were for the valve clearance, and the bumpers were said to push the valves closed in the event of one sticking open if the engine was ever over-revved. There were 3 different sets of cylinder heads available on the 427 in 1963. They were all low-riser style heads and carried part numbers C3AE-6090D, C3AE-6090H, and C3AE-6090J. The D heads were the earliest production head available on the 427. They came on all 427s up until late March to early April. Then came the H heads. The earliest casting date that I have found for the H head is March 15th of 1963. The last of the series is the J head. The J head is considered the best performing version of the low riser heads out there. Both heads, H and J, according to the Ford Master Parts Catalog, were all scheduled for a March 15th, 1963 release date into the production line. The choice of camshaft was a solid lifter unit, part number C3AZ-6250-AA. It carried a lift of 500 thousandths and a duration of 306 degrees, Valve lash was set at 25 thousandths. The single 4V 410 horsepower engines used a low-rise dual-plane single 4-barrel intake, part number C3AE-9424-F. The two 4V inducted 425 horsepower engines used a low-rise dual-plane intake, part number C3AE-9424H. Later cars used the C3AE-9424J. Both of the 2.4 intakes used C3AEC carbs with ported vacuum secondary pods, which were connected through a vacuum hose to equalize their opening rates. There were two different air cleaners used on the 427 engine. The chrome-plated air cleaner, which measured 14.05 inches in diameter, was used on the 427 4V engine with the FA21 air filter. The 427 8V engine used the very familiar cast aluminum oval style air cleaner with the 427 Eagle placed on top. The air filter is unique to the 427 4V engine in that it measures 2¼ inches thick. The valve covers that were used on all 63 427 engines in the Galaxies were the famous chrome baldy style valve covers with the 427 Eagle decal placed in the center. The fuel pump used on the 427 engines was an AC unit, part number 4918, with the AC cast onto the top and bottom of the pump. This pump is considered the correct pump for a proper restoration. Hard 3/8 fuel line was used to the fuel canister, part number B7Q9155-A, and up to the fuel log. The canister was attached to the engine with a special bracket, part number C0AE-9180A. Ford used the long cast iron exhaust manifolds on all 427 engines. On the right-hand side, the manifold was connected to a special exhaust thermostat control valve, part number C3AZ-9A427-A, that was special to the 427 engine. From there, the exhaust consisted of 2-inch pipe bending back to dual mufflers exiting just below the rear bumper. On convertible cars equipped with the 427 engine, the exhaust system received dual resonators located beneath the front seat area to help reduce noise when the top was down. A special timing pointer, part number C2AE-6023-B, was used with a large hypo balancer, part number C2AE-6316-B. The oil filter adapter used on 427 cars was the standard C0AE-6884-A. The dual port oil filter adapter, part number C3AE-6884-A, was seldom used on the 63 427 engines, and when it would be used, it would normally accompany transistorized ignition equipped cars. The bell housing, part number C3AA-6394-A, was designed to accept the 11.5-inch clutch unit mounted to the back of the 427 engine and used the 11.5-inch long clutch release lever, part number C3AZ-7515-B. Clutch release equalizer bar or Z-bar, part number C3AZ-7528-G, was again a special part designed to clear the long exhaust manifolds. A special Z-bar to release lever rod, part number C3AZ-7521-D, has to be used as well. The Borg-Warner T10 was the transmission for all 427 Galaxies in 1963. Their unique feature was the oiling grooves cut vertically into the face of the transmission gears. No other T10 used in the Galaxies had this feature. This modification was used to help with longevity, but proved to be nothing but an ineffective band-aid for the transmission's weakness. That said, some original cars have been documented to have transmissions without the oiling grooves. Ford used a part number stenciling in yellow on the side of T10 transmissions for their identification. After all those years, most times, this stenciling has been worn off or painted over. They were as followed: C3AR-K, C3AR-J, and the most common C3AA-H. In the factory lightweights, an all-aluminum T10 was used. This transmission today is a very rare piece, and original ones can be very, very hard to find. The standard Ford T10 shifter was used in all 427 Galaxies. Although generators were the same 30 amp units shared between regular production models and the 427 cars, the generator pulley, part number FAP-10130-A, and the adjustment arm were special items just for the 427 equipped Galaxies. The pulley was a one-piece design where the pulley and the fan were cast as one and measured 4.32 inches in diameter. The adjustment arm, part number C2AZ-10145-A, was shared with the 406 equipped engines that came with 30 amp hypo generators. The solenoid to starter wire was also unique to the 427 cars. It needed to be a little longer than normal due to the fact that it was routed away from the exhaust manifolds. It ran along the inner fender well back to a bracket bolted to one of the lower bolts of the heater blower control motor cover, and then under and front to the starter to avoid being near the exhaust manifolds. The 427s used a 6-bladed cooling fan with a spacer. The spacer used with this cooling fan is part number B5S-8546-A. It measures 1.28 inches thick. This fan and spacer combination was also used on many 406 and 390 equipped cars as well. The radiator used in the 427 equipped cars carried part number C3AZ-8005-B. And the core measured 22.5 by 17.25 with a thickness of 2 inches. The oil dipstick tube, part number C3AE-6754-C, was used. This was a special piece made for the 427 cars to clear the exhaust manifolds. A special throttle return spring and bracket were used on the dual quad linkage. This consisted of a bracket that was bolted to the driver's side top transmission bolt and its accompanying spring. A most often missing piece is the clutch release lever, spring and frame bracket. Many times these items have been discarded years ago. The spring goes from this bracket and hooks into the hole in the clutch return lever. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video on the unique features of this 1963 427 Ford Galaxies. Hopefully you can use this as a guide when looking at or potentially buying one of these great cars.